So the crisis of meaning. Now we hear talked a lot, right? The spiritual crisis, the meaning crisis. But really, I think it's a bunch of hocus pocus, right? It's a bunch of baloney. I understand where the feelings, the notions come from, but let me unpack it a little bit deeper. So the meaning crisis really is more of a Western idea. We use meaning, significance for a lot of things. And oh, that has a lot of meaning, right? Or that doesn't mean a lot to me, right? We always talk about the purpose, the why. And that's a very important idea, right? Very important idea, but it's a very, very Western idea. Many parts of the world don't really have this meaning crisis, so to say. Okay, then why do we in the West have a meaning crisis? If we unpack it further, when we say meaning, really we mean, what's the point, right? What's the point of all of this? Or what's the point of life, really? And we know pretty much that humans' meaning comes from, or our meaning comes from each other. We're social creatures, not just social, that's our whole entire existence, right? It's an understatement to say we're social creatures, right? It's not an adjective. It's not a description, right? But we are social, like socialness itself, right? We're that social, right? So my meaning is you, and your meaning is me. We are each other's meanings. And when it comes to feelings of nihilism or desperation, desolation, isolation, alienation, right? All these feelings of basically feeling alone, right? And, feeling lost, feeling alone. They really boil down to that feeling that you want to contribute, right? When people say, what's the whole point of all of this, right? What people are really saying is because we're social by nature, right? We want to contribute, right? We want to help each other out, right? But we don't feel like we're contributing. Not just contributing, but we don't feel like we're connecting, right? We don't feel like we're significant, relevant, right? That's what you're saying. If we felt like we had meaning, right? If we felt like that this life was deeply significant, then we would never even ask that question, right? The question, right? What's the whole point of this? That would never even come to mind, right? It would be so obvious. It would be so self-evident. It would be like breathing air, right? We don't like question there's no Wikipedia article or like WikiHow, right? How to breathe. There's different ways to breathe, of course, right? There's different like Tumo or Wim Hof, right? There's different methods of breathing, yes, right? But we don't ask, right, how do you breathe? Because it's so obvious, right? It's so natural. Similarly with meaning, right? If we, by design, we already have meaning, right? Our social nature is our meaning, right? You and I, we are each other's meaning, right? It's so obvious. But the reason why we ask, right? What's the meaning of life, right? What's the whole point of this, right? Why am I here, right? The why? The reason why we ask it is because we feel alienated, right? We don't feel connected with each other, with nature, and ultimately with ourselves. The idea of I want to contribute, right? It's a very important, right? That's a very human feeling, right? That you want to help people out. That's a very human feeling. However, that exact feeling is the feeling of alienation because you want to contribute, right? It's an ego thing, right? It's like you want to feel important, right? You want to feel like you matter, that you're important, that you're significant, right? That comes from the ego. And that's part of being human. This is all part of being human. But when it comes to meaning isn't about the ego. It's not about the ego, right? It basically it doesn't have anything to do with the ego. It would be like meaning comes from us on one level, but on a deeper level, it's only I, the divine I, right? The transcendent I, the self. Meaning comes from connecting with the universe, feeling like you're one. Not just feeling, but you experience the universe as one, right? Oneness. That's where meaning really comes from. That's the entire meaning of our lives. So, for example, in Western cultures, especially America, because America is kind of like the epicenter of Western culture today. You have people, for example, who raise money for charities and then go do a marathon, right? A marathon charity. Which is kind of, that's a very Western way of incorporating meaning into your life, because you're making the meaning distinct, right? You want to both raise money for a charity and you want to also improve yourself, right? You're making a distinction between the two. So that raising money for charities, that's a very Western way of creating meaning or finding meaning. However, in other cultures, many other cultures, there's no notion of this whatsoever, right? It's like just you either run a marathon or you raise funds for a charity, right? You don't do both because it's not aligned, right? You're not. It's not. There's no purity of the thing itself. Right? It seems a little. It can seem a little bit disingenuous, right? Having ulterior motives. Right? Of course, there's the whole idea of virtue signaling. There's a lot of it, especially with social media. But even more, right? Even more fundamentally than that, it just has to do with not even motivation, right? It's not even whether you're doing it for good or bad, or for fear or love. It has nothing to do with motivation. It has nothing to do with your feelings. Both are important, but it has nothing to do with it. Meaning really comes from the connection to your actions, right? That's all that it comes from. Are you connected with your action? And when I say you, of course, because English is a subjective, SVO, it uses a subject. It seems like I'm implying there's an ego, but I'm not. I'm just referring to you, the being, right? You, the being, not necessarily the ego. Most other languages don't use a direct subject. Most use implied, or even like they totally get rid of the subject altogether, right? They don't have a subject. So a lot of this is probably one of the reasons why European Western cultures tend to be more individual, right? Tend to be more atomized, because the language itself is atomized. Because Indo-European languages, most of them, not all, use subjects, right? Direct subjects. But that's a little bit of a tangent. The point being, when it comes to meaning is just, it's everywhere, right? It's inherent, it's intrinsic. It's just when in the West we say the meaning crisis. We're really talking about the connection crisis, right? We don't feel connected to the meaning, to our meaning. We feel isolated, alienated. I can talk about it in three simple levels. One is disconnection from nature, right? This is very obvious, right? We don't spend enough time in nature. So modern people, especially people who live in developed, industrialized Western countries, are very isolated from nature, right? They don't feel connected at all to nature, right? They don't know the seasons, the climate, the weather, right? They don't know the insects, the plants, right? There's so much isolation from nature that it's disrupting this fundamental connection we have with nature, because we are nature. We're not only connected to nature, we are nature. We just feel like we're not. So that's one level, disconnection from nature. The second level is disconnection from each other, right? We don't feel connected with each other. But if you look at any hunter-gatherer society, obviously there's going to be lots of exceptions, and there's a whole variety of hunter-gatherer tribes who live today, who exist today. But in general, they don't feel disconnected at all with their with their tribe, right? Because I mean, they're so close to each other. Obviously, there's going to be squabbles, feuds, obviously, right? But they feel so connected, so like ingrained within their community, right? They don't feel like they're part of a community. They are the community, right? They are the community. So with industrialization, right, we had specialization of occupations, right? It led to lots of efficiency. But in exchange, we had to give up our connection, right? We had to give up our community. Things like mobility, right? Personal vehicles, automobiles, things like economic social mobility, things like occupation, specialization. All these things led to tremendous progress, technologically speaking. But all these things exacerbated this feeling like you're an individual, right? Like an island. But no man is an island. We exist for each other. We exist for each other. So there's a disconnection from nature and disconnection from each other. And then finally, there's a disconnection from self, from your body. Modern people, especially in Western industrialized countries, again, we're so disconnected from our own body, right? Our own primary like mode of being. Right? Even if you feel a little bit of pain, even if you feel a little bit of soreness, right? Or you're not sleeping well, or you're eating junk food, or you're not getting quality social time, or you're not drinking water, right? We ignore all these things, right? To our peril. Now, most people had a very acute sense of awareness about their body. I mean, because otherwise they would have died, yes. But also because it was so important, right? That my body is my temple, right? That connection between you and your body, because you are your body. There's a disconnection between nature, each other, ourselves. And because of that, right, we have this meaning crisis. And now AI is another layer on top of that. We talk about alignment control problem with AI. But really, fundamentally, it all boils down to connection. It all boils down to integration. If we can't align with our body, with each other, with nature, how the heck are we going to align with AI? So all of this, I would call it the crisis of connection, or even, to put it more poignantly, the crisis of you and me.